G'day guys, how you going? My name is Ox Roberts and I work up here in the Northern Territory with an organisation known as Scripture Union. So today I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my story. One, firstly, how I came to be a believer, and two, how my family and I ended up being up here in the top end. So I'm married to Karen. We have two daughters. They're 20 and 18 recently, and yeah, we've been up here since the beginning of last year. But just going back to my past, I grew up in a home where we attended church. When I was about 16 or 17 years old, I decided that wasn't for me. As it is for many teenagers, they find it hard to want to continue going to church. So I decided not to go to church with my parents anymore. Lived life my own way for the next few years. A lot of drinking, really devoted to playing sport, football and cricket and other things. But just partying and being one of the boys was the main focus of my life at that time. During that period, got in trouble a lot. My father was a policeman, so that probably meant I rebelled even worse than some kids. But 3 times I crashed a car drink driving. Lucky enough that I never hurt myself and particularly never hurt anyone else. One of those times there was 11 people in the car, so just some stupid stuff that I did when I was young. I was arrested on a couple of other occasions for doing silly things as well. Things started to change when I met my wife in my early 20s. We instantly connected because she was very similar to me. She had also grown up in a Christian home and had walked away. After we got married and we were pregnant with our first child, my wife became quite sick and she spent some time in hospital. And while she was in hospital, she made a deal with God that if she and the baby were okay, that she would raise the baby in the church. We hadn't been to church for many years, but she knew that God existed, and so she made a deal with him. So after our baby was born, she was born very little, 8 weeks early, and she only weighed about half a normal baby weight. And so she lived in hospital for the first 4 weeks of her life. And after she came home, my wife started taking our daughter to church. And that led to another thing at the church called a playgroup. You might know what a playgroup is, where mums and bubs go along to meet and hang out together. And then after a while, my wife got a new job and also started studying. And so I started going to playgroup as a dad with my daughter. After about 18 months, we'd had another child in that period. I ended up going to church as well. So my wife had been going to church regularly in that couple of years. And then I went back to church. I hadn't been to church for 13 years. On the first day I went back to church, and God had it planned because a guy who spoke at church that day was a sports chaplain of the Western Bulldogs AFL team and the Australian Boomers basketball team. And he gave a sermon about sports and how, So there was a couple of hundred people at this church that we went to. And for me, I know that God had that sermon just for me that day. So from then on, I started going to church every week. And about 4 months later, I gave my life to Jesus. And my life instantly changed in that very moment. I still look back now and go, how did I do that? But on that very night, I went to work at a newspaper where I was working, and I called in 35 work colleagues in a big circle, and I told them all, this morning at church, I gave my life to Jesus and I will never be the same again. And there was dead silence and everyone just was really awkward, but I didn't care. And my life was very different from that point on. But what really led me back to the church was 3 ladies at the playgroup who just loved me and cared for me and my daughter, and I hadn't experienced that before. So that's what led me to go back to church, and then obviously the church people loved me and cared for us, and I knew that God was real. So that was back in 2003. So that's a long time ago now, but lots of things have happened in my life since then. In 2008, I went on a mission trip to Central Australia. It was with the Warlpiri people out at Yunnamoo and Alikarung and Wallara, and my uncle Norm Roberts and Karen Roberts, my auntie, they used to be cross-cultural workers with Global Interaction out there. We spent 2 weeks on community, and that was the first time I felt God saying, you might end up in the Northern Territory one day. Then the following year, I ended up in Christian ministry, having worked in newspapers for 18 years. And I got involved in working for Christian camps, first in New South Wales with the Baptist Union, and then I moved to Victoria and started running the campsites for Scripture Union in Victoria. In 2014, we had a family trip to the Northern Territory, so I brought my wife and our 2 daughters. We spent some time in Darwin travelling around, and we spent a week on community with my uncle and auntie down at Alikarung. We attended the Easter Convention, the Warlpiri Easter Convention. And while we were up here, my wife said, I think we're going to live in Darwin one day. And we went, yeah, okay. But anyway, then in 2016, I was at a conference in Queensland for Scripture Union, and I met a lady named Rachel Borneman, who many of you might know. We talked about how she works up here in the top end, and she's involved with a camp called Nungalinya Camp, which she shared in her testimony a couple of weeks ago. And we talked about how the group of people who I was working with in Victoria might be able to come out and help Rachel with running this camp. And so the following year in 2017, our team came up and helped run the camp. And in 2018, I came back and helped run Nungalinya Camp with a group of young people from Victoria. And at that time, I found out that the position for Scripture Union in Darwin and the Northern Territory was probably going to be available. So I went home and told my wife, and she said, yep, let's move to Darwin. So that happened in late 2018, and we moved up here at the start of last year. So we know that the whole time since, particularly, or my whole life, God has always protected me. As I said, I had some crazy things happen when I was young. And he's always opened the doors for us as we've moved to different places, and we've just been obedient to where he's called us. And we know that we are meant to be here now in the Northern Territory and serving him. So I love what I do with Scripture Union. We run lots of programs for kids and youth, running camps and holiday programs, teaching the Bible in schools to children. And I love working with Rachel and other people out in community as well. And just for me, one of my favourite Bible verses has always been John 15:5. And it says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man or woman remains in me, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And I love that verse because it reminds me all the time that I have to stay connected to the vine, who is Jesus. And so I have to hang on, and I have to be intentional about remaining in him. But the second part of the verse reminds me that no matter what I do, if I don't do it with him, it won't bear fruit, because it tells us that we can't bear fruit unless Jesus and God are involved in the work that we do. So anyway, thank you very much. That's just a little bit about my story.